Now, rebuilding Greek credibility, that is the task that's facing Greece's finance minister as he embarks on a whistle-stop tour of Europe. But can George Papakonstamtinou shore up investor confidence, convince the markets that the country is back on track and will meet budget deficit targets? Well, he joins me now. Mr. Papakonstamtinou, thank you very much indeed for coming in to talk to us this morning. Thank you. Now, if I can begin by talking to you about those EU and IMF growth targets. The target's 13.7% this year. Now, the government revenue did rise 3.3% in the first 8 months. That does mean that you would need a growth increase of more than 30% to meet those targets. Do you think
actually,
you're in line to do that?
the real target that we have to get to is a target for reducing the deficit. And that target is to reduce the deficit by, at the end of the year, a little bit shy of 40%, which is a huge decline. 12 billion less than 12 billion euro less than 2009. We're actually already cut 7 billion of that 12 billion. We're ahead of the curve. We're ahead. We even have a cushion in terms of deficit reduction at the 8th month. And this is because we've been cutting expenditures faster than the program was projecting. So yes, we are a little bit behind in terms of revenue collection, but that's more than compensated by the fact that expenditures have been declining faster.
So you may miss the 13.7% target, but you're not so worried about that?
We may have some shortfall in revenues because the country's in a recession, for example, and even though VAT has gone up, and we've seen an increase in VAT receipts, for example, 10% up in August, overall revenues have not been rising as high as we had been projecting. But as I said, we've been quite successful in reducing expenditures, and actually experience shows that the most successful fiscal consolidation comes more from having a control on your expenditures rather than from your revenues, which you cannot always control.
Now, some countries, like Israel, have introduced these diaspora bonds, the idea being that those expats who've moved away from Greece but still have a lot of ties there, for example in the US or in Australia, might be interested in buying those bonds. Is that something you're considering actively?
Indeed, we've looked at that. This is something that we are preparing. There's as many Greeks abroad as there are in Greece, and therefore a diaspora bond which will tap the market and the willingness of Greek citizens abroad, or Greeks abroad more generally, to contribute to this effort that is being done is something that we want to do. We will be rolling something like this out sometime in 2011.
So it will be coming out next year?
Yes, indeed.
And what kind of price are you looking at?
We'll have to see that. We're working the details out. We're talking to a lot of market makers. We're looking at how the best way to bring this out.
Okay, and you don't have any more details to give us at the moment?
Not at the moment, no.
If we look at the VAT situation, because obviously you need to raise revenue as well, are you going to increase that to things like food and clothing?
No, VAT has gone up by 4 percentage points, and this has been a huge increase. We are trying to limit any further increases. In the program we have agreed with the EU and the IMF, there is a provision for increasing the VAT on certain items that are now on a low band scale. We're looking at the way to minimize that, because we're quite worried that further increase in VAT may hurt the market, and we're trying to find alternative solutions to that. That will be in the budget that will be tabled to Parliament in October.
Now, you have successfully cut spending, as you've been telling me, but on the issue of tax, even today, the IMF talking about the need to cut back on tax evasion and to increase the amount of income tax that you're able to collect. What kind of percentage of the income tax that is available to collect are you collecting at the moment?
Well, tax evasion is a big problem in our country, as in some others, but it is something that we are tackling in a very determined way, and we've actually been showing results. For example, in the first 6 months of this year, we've collected over 1 billion of tax arrears, which were uncollected. We have changed the rules in the new tax law that we passed to be able to introduce presumptive taxation based on assets, so that somebody cannot be offering services, declaring very low income, and at the same time have a car to houses and send his kids to private school. We're changing the legal system, because until now you could have 7 to 10 years until a tax dispute would be settled in the court. We're shortening those deadlines. And therefore we're completely overhauling the system around taxation in order to be able to make sure that the large percentage that is currently being lost, because if you look at VAT, for example, we're 5% lower than the average in terms of receipts and the average EU member, to be able to bridge that gap without having to increase tax rates.
So do you know what proportion of income tax you're currently collecting?
We do know where we're collecting, we do know the absolute numbers, and we do know that we're collecting less than what is out there and what we should be collecting. And I think the best approximation to that is if you look at the difference between revenues from taxation in Greece as opposed to revenues from taxation in the EU. The difference is around 5 percentage points.
Okay. Now, what are the chances that Greece is going to have to roll over that IMF EU loan?
At the moment, we are fully on track with the program. We've opened up all the big reforms effort. We've finalized a radical pension reform, which makes the system viable for the long term. We've had tax reform, budget reform, labor market reform. We've opened up closed professions. All this is going to be a positive shock to the economy from the supply side to increase growth rates. The fiscal deficit is going down. We're moving into primary surpluses. So the combination of primary surpluses and high growth rates means that we will be fully able to roll over our debt and be able to manage the debt within the existing program and with the rules that we have at the moment.